Full Rules Podcast, episode 3 or 4. What is this? 1, 2, 3. This is episode 4 with Joey Morency. Joey is a former MMA fighter and former S&C coach turned MMA coach and gym owner. He is the owner of Click MMA, and his goal is to provide his city with an alternative, an MMA gym with an athlete-centered approach guided by nonlinear pedagogy and ecological dynamics. He aspires to foster a culture of self-directed learning within a tightly knit team. So that's a quick bio for Joey. Joey, his words were he's a failed MMA fighter, but I edited that because I think anybody who gets in there has already won, in my view. Joey is a new friend of mine. We met at the Ecological Dynamics for Submission Grappling Seminar, the first ever of its kind at the Ecopalooza up at Springfield 10th Planet. Yeah, Joey and I have been connecting pretty regularly on all things S&C, ecological dynamics, and it was great to have him on the show. I feel like, again, we could have easily gone another like half an hour, 45 minutes. So what I've learned from these past couple interviews is that I really need to leave plenty of time to let the conversation just go where it needs to go. We both had a hard stop, so we had to cut it at an hour. But again, I feel like we could have easily gone another 45 minutes or so. So I hope you look forward to this. I think we have a lot of good nuggets that coaches looking to adopt an ecological dynamics approach to MMA or any combat sport can really take a lot out of this. Joey gives some practical examples, and I'll put all his contact info in the show notes. He's more than willing to field any questions you might have if you are an MMA coach looking to adopt this style of training. So let's get it. Joey, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time this morning. Why don't you give us a little bit of backstory? What's your origin story, where you're from, all that good stuff?
Oh, well, first, thanks for having me on, man. Happy to chat. I'm not going to know where to look, whether I'm supposed to be looking right here or at you. So I might come off
whatever.
as dumber than I already am. But yeah, I mean, I'll try to give the quick spiel. I run a gym in the Ottawa Gatineau area. So Gatineau is a border town intersecting Quebec and Ontario. I've been living here 15 years. Prior to that, I grew up in a small town on the east coast of Canada, on the Quebec-Labrador border, right across from Newfoundland. I started martial arts at a young age, but starting with traditional martial arts, and it was more of as a hobby. My first real love and passion was lifting weights. I was a skinny kid. I wanted to be jacked. When I was a really young kid, I wanted to be a pro wrestler, and embarrassingly enough, that dream stuck around until I was about 18. Then I woke up one day wondering, what the hell am I going to do with my life now that I don't want to be a pro wrestler? And then I got into MMA, and since then I've never looked back. Had I guess, a short stint in fighting, short and long at the same time. Not a big career or anything luxurious by any stretch. And that all brought me to coaching today. So
Nice. What traditional martial arts did you start with?
I started with Kenpo karate. It was the only thing available in my hometown. But what was good about it, actually, even though like a lot of people start with traditional martial arts and they don't have necessarily a great experience because they feel like the transfer to real combat sports and fighting is not there. One thing that it was really good at for me is some of my instructors, these guys were real athletes. They played hockey, they played other sports, they did other martial arts as well. They had, some of them had kickboxing backgrounds, some had done judo, some had wrestled in university, granted in Canada, but so these guys were all into MMA, so they got me into watching MMA, and they encouraged me to do combat sports when I moved away for school. So
Nice. Did you go like right into full MMA, or was there kind of like a parent like a parent's discipline, or was karate that kind of parent discipline that kind of fed into MMA?
When I started training more like your typical combat sports, I came up under a pretty traditional gym. So I wanted to do MMA right away. But this was back in 2009, 2010, and the gym I was at again was more of a traditional spot. So the logic at the time for I think a lot of gyms was get good at one thing first, whether it's grappling, striking. Typically in Canada, it's Brazilian Jiu Jitsu or Muay Thai. There's not a big wrestling culture. So most of the gyms were Muay Thai and Jiu Jitsu gyms, kind of disguised as MMA gyms.
Mm,
No disrespect, but like that's kind of how the scene is in Canada.
yeah.
Um, so I ended up doing gi jiu-jitsu almost exclusively for the first 3 years of training, uh, and then got into fighting MMA. I did do some MMA training and some striking in those 3 years, but it was primarily gi, and I did a lot of gi competition as well. That was primarily a gi school.
Yeah. It's kind of like that in the US also. There's like a lot of schools that, there'll be like a jiu-jitsu school that has a Muay Thai program or a Muay Thai school that has a jiu-jitsu program. And then there's like kind of an off the menu MMA class like once a week or twice a week or something like that. I found that's a pretty common um scene down here as well. And yeah, I don't know why that is because MMA is so popular. I would say MMA is more popular than both jiu-jitsu and
Yeah,
Muay Thai, but for some reason that transfer isn't happening kind of at the school level, and I kind
yeah,
of wonder why. I wonder why that is. I know, like where I train Muay Thai, my head coach just said he had a difficult time getting people to show up for the MMA classes. Like he had a guy who I think he fought in the UFC, and a local guy who was going to teach MMA, and for whatever reason, people just didn't show up to the class, and so he kind of had to scrap it. What do you think the reason for that is in Canada?
yeah. I've thought about this a lot, and I think the reasoning applies, no matter where you are. So there's a couple things going on. The first thing we can't ignore is that MMA is a relatively new sport.
Mm,
So the fact that it's new makes it harder to train in because most people coming up don't have a real MMA background. Maybe they did come from somewhere else. So if they came up under, I don't know, maybe they did Muay Thai for 5 years or 10 years, and then they fought MMA, they're still figuring out how exactly to coach MMA. So just the novelty of everything is one hurdle. Um, I think another thing is combat sports are already hard enough to coach to a pedestrian or a hobbyist because it's hard, right? We are kind of in a fringe sport, no matter how mainstream it's getting. Uh, and I think when you're dealing with just one part of the art, it may seem easier to water down, right? Just doing Muay Thai, okay, well, we can shadow box and skip rope and hit pads for an hour, right? I think jiu-jitsu waters itself down and makes it more accessible to a non-athlete or maybe someone who's not fully committed by running around in circles around the mat and drilling techniques and talking about the last instructional they watched, and then maybe breaking a sweat for five
yeah,
minutes at the end of the session, right? Um, I think with MMA, it's a bit of a tougher sell because I mean you can watch it on TV, it's everywhere, right? And okay, this is a bit more real. Um, not to say that you couldn't water it down, but I think there's just less because it's new, there's less of that going on. Um, Although I wouldn't be surprised if like in another 10, 20, 30 years that becomes the case, right? Where like you can walk into a typical gym and it will be just straight up like MMA classes.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting because it's like most people um, that get into MMA are probably on the more serious side about their training. Like typically they come from some other martial art, like a base martial art, and they want to take it to that next level. I want to do more MMA. Like I'm training jiu-jitsu 12 years, Muay Thai for 5 years, but I've never like put the striking and grappling together. And so I'm really excited to be able to do that in the near future. But it just seems like it's difficult. But I think that you have to have a level of seriousness and dedication to your own training before you kind of take that leap. I think for a lot of people, at least right now.
I think in the current climate, that's the case, right? I think um, that doesn't have to be the case. Like a lot of people do come in wanting to do it all because that's what they watch, right? So that's kind of the expectation. It's like, oh, MMA gym, even if the gym might actually just be disguised as one, it's like that's what they're going in for. And then they end up getting pulled to do Muay Thai or Jiu-Jitsu or whatever the gym is offering, right? But if they were just offering straight up MMA from the jump, no matter how good or bad or what exactly that session looked like, I think people would stick with it. At least that's been my experience since opening the place. My gym is still new, but uh, I'm trying to very much be an MMA gym. So we have MMA sessions for beginners and young aspiring competitors alike. Uh, to me, there's no difference in the training. Um, you just scale it to where you're at and to what your goals are. But otherwise, I mean, there's a lot of guys who train really hard in Muay Thai or Jiu-Jitsu, and they're just regular guys. No, they're never going to fight. They're never going to compete. They don't have that in them because most people don't, and that's totally fine. But I think those same guys could just as easily be doing MMA. There's just never really been an opportunity for it in your stereotypical MMA gym or martial arts gym in Canada or maybe even the States, based on what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, at least in New York. I mean, my kind of purview is limited, of course, but that's just what I've observed down here. How long has Click MMA been? How long have your doors been open?
It'll be 2 years mid-May.
Hell yeah, that's a big
Yeah.
milestone. I was just I did an interview yesterday with my friend Mark DeSalvo. He owns a like a strength and conditioning gym in New York
Oh,
City,
nice.
and and we were talking about how there's like these milestones in either gym ownership or even just like coaching or training in general. Like you make it past that 2 year mark, like that's a really good sign. And then there's like another
Yeah.
milestone at like 5 or 7 years. I can't remember like which. That's like another big one. But like that's a really big accomplishment. So you mentioned um a brief fight career and now you're kind of more focused on coaching. What's kind of like your overall coaching philosophy when working with your athletes?
Yeah, so I mean, we actually met at you and I at the Eco Palooza camp. So I'm I'm trying to my best to apply an ecological approach. So for those who don't know, ecological approach is basically I guess an alternative view on motor learning. Right? There's basically the two camps. There's the information processing approach. I'll dumb it down, but like basically it just we think that like the brain is kind of like this computer sending these like mental models, these programs that we've created to apply to the performance environment, right? So you know, think doing these drills or these certain plays or like the step by step kind of way that we take that program, we try to like automate it so that it's ready for the game. Ecological approach has a completely different theory based on direct perception. It comes from ecological psychology and dynamic systems theory. You kind of mesh the two together. You use the main theory of that perception is direct, and all that really means this kind of guides the practice, saying that if perception is direct, we don't need these mental models and programs to memorize and automate for the live and performance environment. We can pick up that information in the live environment and it's always there. So you use that to guide your practice. So like in short, it's really just it's all live. There's no drilling, no rote repetition in a static, out of context kind of way.
Yeah. Can you give us, for people that might not know, an example of like direct perception in like a training context?
Well, I guess in this approach, because perception is direct, the information that we can pick up is always there. So I guess maybe we could contrast the two. So like maybe let's say traditional approach would teach someone how to shrimp, right?
Hmm.
And they'll tell you how to place your foot and how to move backwards to make that space. This is I think a pretty good example because like if you take someone off the street, well, one, they don't know what the hell a shrimp is. they don't necessarily know why they're doing the movement. And it's simple enough. You say, oh, well, we use this to make some space and to get away. We're essentially like fleeing from the
Mhm.
guy with some kind of frames to make sure that he can't follow. Um, but I mean, if you look across the room, like maybe people shrimping up and down the mat, every rep looks different, which is not a bad thing, but maybe the coach might see that as a bad thing. It's like, oh, they're shrimping wrong. Well, there's no context to tell them to shrimp otherwise, right? And then if we really look at what's going on and why someone would shrimp, it's like, well, we're fleeing with frames, and that's my at least my understanding of it.
Mhm.
Um, so if I wanted someone to behave in such a way, I could recreate a the environment to create that opportunity for action, right? So in the science, that we call that like an affordance, an opportunity or an invitation to act, right? So I could just put them in a top player in the mount position, bottom player on the bottom, and just explain the importance of making space and creating distance, right? So distance management, just a basic foundation of like all combat sports. So I could tell them, okay, top player, you try to stay close, try to hold them down, stay on top. Bottom player, we're going to try to get our hands on our partner to push them off of us. Uh, if we wanted the exact shrimp to emerge, I don't think that would necessarily be useful, but maybe we could, oftentimes the shrimping, we're trying to regard, right? So maybe depending on what behavior you want to emerge, but depending on how you want them to behave and act, you could say, push your partner away and try to get your knees back in front of them. Your legs are currently behind your partner. Try to get them back in front of them, facing your partner. So, you won't get that exact shrimp, but you'll get the whole point of the shrimp, right?
Yeah, which is like the most important thing. I kind of uh trying to think of a nice way to say this. Critique people that try to blend like strength and conditioning with some type of like sport specific movement.
Oh yeah.
Oh my god, what was that? You see these balloons
Oh
popping up?
yeah.
The hell was that? I gotta turn that off. And like it's you make such a good point. It's like perception and action need to be coupled in order for that skill to emerge, right? So like me doing some type of like leg pummeling or like leg lassoing with a rubber band doesn't really tell me anything. The line of pull doesn't even make sense. If I'm trying to like create space, that pressure is usually coming from above. And so it just there's all these reasons why I think time time a time constraint is such a real thing in a training context. It's like we have an hour, maybe two, in some places to work with our athletes, and so every minute counts. And so making sure that
Yeah.
we're using that time as efficiently as possible is critical, right? And so you know making sure that people are picking up information from their environment in a real context is so important. I'm a relative newcomer to the whole ecological thing. I've only been really 100% for like 6 months probably at this point.
Okay.
You I think for a little long. Have you been 100% eco since you opened your doors?
Yep. Yeah. So I decided to go fully with it. When I first opened, I wasn't alone in the project. So like I was the only one using this, although I was coaching a majority of the sessions. And I kept it that way at first because um, I kind of wanted to figure this out just on my own at first because I didn't know what I was doing. So, and I was still learning and figuring everything out, just not from just a coaching perspective, but even just picking up the information and trying to understand it. So I kind of just, even though I was the majority and coaching most of the classes, I kept it kind of close to myself, and then started opening up, and people started noticing too, right? They're like, hey, like you're like we're not doing the typical things here, right? So I'd kind of start to let maybe people closer to me know. But yeah, no, for more or less, I've been doing it since the jump, and the we're almost at 2 years now. I've been coaching exclusively using it for all the sessions I coach, and I came across it a couple years before that. My first introduction to it was, I guess, my first introduction to the science would have been thanks to a guy on Instagram called School of Grappling. His name's Andy. He was posting about this stuff, I think, as early as 2020, 2021. And then he was on a podcast, actually, Sonny Brown Breakdowns. Shout out to Sonny. He's got a really cool podcast, and he used to make these really neat YouTube videos breaking down maybe more unconventional techniques and showing footage of like actual fighters actually using these unconventional techniques or movements. So yeah, shout out to him. But he had Andy on, and I was reading Andy's post, and he was talking about this framework, and he was talking about affordances and stuff. I didn't know what the hell it was. I was like, oh, it's interesting. Like I could tell that it was like about training live, which I was already a big believer in anyway. But when I heard him speak on the podcast, I was very really skeptical, and I was looking at his posts. I was like, this is probably bullshit. I was like, I was pretty sure that I was like, if I just had John Danaher or some other like high level coach next to me telling me what to do and saying, hey, like instead of doing this, do that, I could go to the moon, right? I wasn't willing to like let go of my ego of thinking, if I just had the right guy beside me, I could you know perform much better and accelerate my learning just by having that like so-called master give me the answer and the shortcut, right? So I was very skeptical at first. Fortunately, I have some people around me who are much smarter than I am, and a friend of mine who's a used to be a professor at the University of Ottawa in ethics, really intelligent guy. I was passing some of this stuff on to him, and then showing him some, just I guess some basic breakdowns and stuff on ecological dynamics. And I was like, is this all woo woo? Is this like a very fringe alternative? Like, I can't tell, right? And he was looking at it. He was like, no, this looks pretty legitimate. Probably keep digging, right? Keep going down this rabbit hole and see where you end up. So luckily I had him to encourage me to keep going. It's always nice to have an academic around to say, okay, no, like it looks this field might be junk or not.
Yeah.
So shout out to him. And the more I read, the more convinced I got. So
It makes sense, man. I feel like there's just like an intuitive, like the whole central governor, like where like you mentioned earlier, like your brain is like a hard drive and you have all these files locked away. And like if I want to pick up this phone, I pull out the pickup phone program, and it
yeah,
just doesn't really mesh with my experience. It's like I perceive that phone to be pick upable, and therefore I can pick it up. I turn a doorknob because it's turnable. And like that framework or that mindset just makes sense to a training perspective, or from a training perspective. Um, you what does a typical class look like? So I know we're both friends with Scott Seavright, and I've had calls with him where particularly with striking, because like it's easier to go uh live grappling like 100% of the time.
yeah,
Much more difficult with striking, you know what I mean? Like we can't get our bell rung that often. We have a certain number of miles that we want to kind of stay under with that kind of contact. So how do you organize like the striking components of your classes with it through an ecological approach?
yeah. I still do it as I would for grappling, but like you said, the biggest challenge, right, is the fact that striking is more traumatic than grappling, right? Like once guys have a bit of training, they can start to grapple. Well, they can grapple pretty much like full out on day one. There's some downsides to that too. Obviously, they're not quite conditioned for that training yet, but
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't take that long, right? Because they're not getting punched. I think being able to take hard shots does take a long time. The body needs to condition over maybe months and years. Um, but while saying that, you can do that by doing more live training, right? Not to say that pads and bag work won't help condition you; they certainly will, right? Smashing pads and stuff. And I still think there's some benefits to that as far as a conditioning wise, not just conditioning for your cardio or anything like that, on your speed and your power, but also conditioning the body, the shins, the hands, the elbows, etc. Um, but no, yeah, I would do it the same. So in my sessions, I don't use any pads or bag work 99% of the time. I try to have them training with each other in that sparring situation, no matter how small the slice of the game is. It's in line with the ecological framework. Um, so I haven't ran a full striking session in a while. My right hand guy Pat coaches all of them right now, and Kate does one as well. But I'm actually going to be coaching a foundations striking session once a week. I think starting in a week or two. So I would usually start it with some sort of game of tag. So no gear on at all, and just trying to tag each other with an open hand, no different than kids would, right?
Mm-hmm.
It could be completely free. I tell them chest, shoulders, body, lead, leg. I might tell them, okay, today we're doing lefty versus righty, and you can throw whatever you want, but we're really looking to throw with the rear hand. Um, or maybe I give a target instead of one of their own weapons, right? So you can kind of constrain and play with that however you want. I think mixing it up a little bit just for a bit of variety's sake is good. Um, Once we've done our tag, we'll gear up and we'll start. Could be anything really. I try to have a similar focus for a good part of the session, whether half or sometimes the entire session. Maybe it'll be a more kick centric session. Maybe it'll be a more clinch centric. Maybe it'll be a bit more ring craft centric. One thing that I'm really autistic about is creating a perimeter for the guys because I don't have a cage or a ring here. So we're always on open space and mats. So I try to put these cones down just to create like their own ring. Other like because I mean you've been striking a while. You've probably seen guys start in one corner and now they're in the change room.
Yeah,
They're so their round is all over the place, right? So they're not using because there's no reason not to, right? There's
yeah,
nothing constraining them. They're just we're on the mats, right? So if you can just put a few cones down or even hand wraps or anything you can use to demark the area, um, you're going to see a lot of that ring cutting and stuff just emerge, right? And you can even focus their attention to it. You can say, listen, like your goal here is to actually push the guy out of bounds, right? Whether it's by physically putting hands on him or just by trying to make him move that way. We could start them in a corner. We can start them along the perimeter. So I try to do a lot of stuff like that in MMA and in striking because I think that's something that doesn't really, in a traditional approach, it doesn't really get taught. And if it does, in my experience at least, it was never effective. It
mm,
never like, oh, you're gonna step like this and throw your hook, or you're gonna step like this and you're gonna set up your low kick. It's like I don't know, just the transfer is just not there because it's too prescriptive, it's too explicit. Uh,
yeah.
uh, Fights don't happen like that. They're too fast.
Yeah, Scott made a good point when I was talking to him one time. Maybe it was even in a podcast. I can't remember, but he was just saying that how like the way that we teach certain strikes is like these really exaggerated pivots. Whereas like in a combat scenario, like a live scenario, you don't really see a ton of that. You know what I mean? It's a lot of like throwing from the hip. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the movements coming from like torso and hip, and the feet aren't really pivoting that dramatically. And I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up. You mentioned like setting up constraints. I was just thinking back to I trained at Henzo's in the city for in New York City for a long time,
Oh, nice.
and their Muay Thai program. I did jujitsu and Muay Thai there, but their Muay Thai program was like the mats were kind of narrow but like very long, and the class it's a big school, so we would have I don't know anywhere from like 40 to 50 people on the mats any given sparring session, and we would set up shoots with just like Thai pads, and I'm talking like maybe if you were lucky, you got like a 4x4 space and you had to like stay in there. And it
Yeah.
really got me comfortable with just standing in front of somebody and like weathering a storm and like not kind of being like I feel like that really did a lot for me um, to just kind of be able to stay in the pocket. Not that you should stay in the pocket all the time, but it really did a lot from like my psychological game to just be able to like stand in front of somebody and like just throw like if I needed to. I think that's a really good a good
Yeah,
look.
yeah, I think it's really important to play around with the environment for striking. Like in grappling, there's even though I don't think there's that much more in grappling when we talk about positions or moves or whatever or connections. In striking, I think there's even less, right? We're really just
Yeah.
trying to hit, not get hit, and control the small perimeter that we're in, right? That area of space. So I think playing around with that environment and making it bigger or smaller or starting in a particular area or trying to maintain that area, these are all really useful situations and games to put the athletes in because the downside with a traditional approach and doing that where they just maybe drill stuff and they have these like little programs and models that they try to replicate in their fight, which really is just maybe a too constrained of an intention, or maybe they're too constrained on what they're paying attention to. Um, I'm not even sure where I was going with this anymore. We got lost track.
Yeah.
Um,
All good.
I what was I saying?
Like
Uh,
I think we started on environmental
on
constraints.
environment, yeah, I think yeah. So traditional approach. Sorry, yeah. You go trying to like exactly replicate these models and programs that you've created, and then you're into sparring. Um, People develop their own styles almost too quickly, right? Like
Mm,
they like you'll have a guy who can't fight going backwards at all, and it's like, well, he's never been invited to do it, right? He's never been
right.
really constrained to do it, so he's never seen the opportunities to do it. He doesn't have any success there. He hasn't found any stability there, right? Whereas when we use this approach, like by playing with the environment, maybe by setting some particular constraints, I think you get a more robust, more varied guy. Not to say that they can't just fall into like what we would normally call an A game right away.
Mhm.
Um, I think you can break a lot of that stuff uh, with this approach.
Yeah. You mentioned a foundations class that you're going to be doing. One of the biggest critiques that I think we get when adopting an ecological approach is like the fundamentals. Like you have to teach the fundamentals first, and then you can play around with all this other stuff. And anybody who's into this approach kind of rejects that flat out. Can you talk a little bit about um, kind of just the fallacy of that thinking, and maybe explain um, how you get the quote unquote fundamentals to emerge?
Yeah, I mean, you already know this, but like in the ecological approach, like fundamental is kind of a dirty word, right? Because like we don't
Yeah.
really know. There's we don't think there's necessarily anything fundamental as far as like movement solutions goes, right? Because like so you knowing that, I knowing that, we kind of reject that. We throw that idea out, and it's like, okay, well, what's really going on, right? What is the foundation of striking? What is striking really? And I really think it's just distance management and trying to connect to your partner, right? So connecting either via clinching or striking, right? Most striking sports is striking focus. Like boxing, they break the clinch pretty fast, right? Kickboxing, they break it pretty quick. Muay Thai being the exception, and maybe some of the Asian styles where they can actually like I think in Sanda they can like wrestle each other, which is
Yeah.
kind of cool.
That's sick.
Um, but yeah, it's really just that, right? It's just managing the distance and connecting to your partner. So like that's the foundation. So now like what can we find in there that's really fundamental? I don't know if there's, it's going to sound controversial, right? I don't think there's anything fundamental about throwing a jab versus throwing a right hand versus throwing a hook. Scott talks about this a lot too, right? It's like you see some jabs that kind of look a little bit like hooks, or some hooks that kind of look a little jabby or a little
Hmm.
uppercutty, right? And then we've got all these different fancy names for, I've heard people say the jab that's kind of uppercutty, they call it a Mexican jab, or maybe the lead hook to the body that's more for the liver shot, like that's the hook on the 45-degree angle, as opposed to just like your typical more loopy body shot. And then we've got different types of jabs, but I think it's all just like you got your lead hand, you got your rear hand. There's pros and cons to each shot if it's thrown in isolation. But even then, it depends on the context of the moment you're in, right? Some people will say, oh, they need to know the fundamentals because if they just lead with their rear hand all the time, they're going to get in trouble. It's like, well, they're going to figure out that that may not be a winning strategy for them by doing it, right? And I think some people will scrutinize that by saying, yeah, but striking is dangerous, so we have to tell them to keep them safe. It's like, well, we can probably make sparring a bit safer. Uh, so that would be one solution. And two, it's like I still don't think telling them explicitly works, right? I haven't had a very positive experience in my upbringing, especially as far as striking coaching goes. I've found very few striking coaches that I could gel with. It's funny, me and a really close friend of mine that I used to compete and train with a lot. His name's Ben. We uh, we did MMA. Ben for a shorter stint, he was an excellent grappler. But when we were kind of transitioning more into MMA and striking, he was saying, he's like, you know what I like about grappling? He's like, nobody tries to tell you to grapple exactly their way. They're just trying to teach you how to grapple. I think some of that's true to an extent. Obviously, with the traditional approach, they still might just be telling you what they would do. But in striking, it's all the more obvious, I think, because there's less going on. Uh, my experience from striking coach to striking coach was like they told me to jab the way they jab. They told me to kick the way they kick. They told me to pivot the way they pivot. Um, and that never worked. And with my personality, I always thought, well, fuck, I'm the one who's the problem, right? I can't replicate these movements.
Right.
I'm clearly the guy with two left feet or something, right?
Yeah.
And you know, to an extent, there's some truth to that, right? I'm no I'm a far cry from John Jones or someone like that. But I think a lot of the problems were in just the way it's coached.
Yeah.
Uh, they teach you to move the way they move, and you can't do it. You may be able to replicate it to some extent, but in the end, you're who you are, and you're gonna move, and you're gonna solve those problems, and you're gonna fight the way you're gonna fight, right? Like Mike Perry fights the way he fights, and then a guy like Stephen Thompson fights the way he fights, regardless of styles, right? There's also temperament, there's also like emotion, and there's a lot to it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of kind of under the hood type stuff that makes a fighter what they are. I'm just laughing as you're talking because the first place I trained Muay Thai, one of the coaches was insistent that I had to throw my hook thumb up like every time. Like I can never
Right.
go this kind of, and it just felt so weird. And it was definitely a technique thing. I was pretty new, and so I just like it was hurting my wrist. Like I was landing, it just did not feel right. And the same thing, I thought that like I'm just bad. Like everyone else seems to be able to do this, and I'm just shit. And it
Yep.
has like such a negative effect on like your kind of that under the hood stuff that we're talking about. Like if you think
Yeah.
you're deficient in some way, you're not going to push into that next level. You don't feel creative. And the other thing is like, it's so funny to me that at the highest levels, we value creativity. When people do unorthodox shit, we're just like, oh my God, everyone loses their mind, and how creative and stylish certain fighters are. Yet we try to like squeeze that creativity out of people from day one. You know what I mean? It's just like do it this way, paint inside the line, color inside the lines, and
Yep.
and don't do anything differently. So I think there's this huge disconnect for like, you know, our intentions and our actions, like what we want to see and what we actually show people.
I think that's why your average fighter or trainee who watches the creative guys, I think that's why they're so in awe of it because they wish they could, right?
Yeah.
Because they've been told that they can't, right? They'll like tell you like Mayweather can fight with his lead hand down in the Philly shell, but you can't. It's like, well, why? Right?
Right.
Um, they'll say, oh, he's creative, but not everybody's creative. So what the hell does that even mean? Right.
Right.
Um, and I think that's why people react so hard one way or another. You have the traditional charlatans who are like, yeah, he can do that, but he's still wrong for some reason, right? It's
Right.
like it's going to catch up to him one day.
Right.
So like the arguments are just absurd, right? It's like
Yeah.
I don't know enough about other sports, but like I'd imagine it happens everywhere. But yeah, I don't know. Like in football, are they saying, "Oh, like, this guy runs this way, or throws the ball this way, or catches it this way"? That's going to catch up to him, and how dare he not do it the way my high school coach showed me 25 years ago?
Right. I
It's
had
just
this
fucking insane.
I had this I was trolling at one point just because it was just like funny to me, but like there was some guy posted this video of like he was like interviewing somebody on the street. He was like a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, and he's like he's a comedian actually, and he was interviewing this girl, and the girl's drunk boyfriend like just like hits him from behind, and they get into a little scuffle, and the interviewer, purple belt guy, just drops in, like takes, grabs hold of one of the guy's legs and like heel hooks him on the street. So I comment, how's that for jujitsu not working in the streets? And of course, like, the troll, everyone just came in like, well, he ate 2 shots on the way down, and here's why he's wrong. And I'm like, listen, nobody cares how the fight starts, but everybody cares how it ended. You know what I
Yep.
mean? And the guy, was able to neutralize and, defeat his opponent. Period. End of story. It worked. And these guys were like foaming at the mouth, telling me why it didn't work, even though there was video proof like of jujitsu working like right there in front of them. It's just like it's crazy to me, like these absurd arguments that people make just to kind of fit their narrative.
Yeah, this is something that I find really difficult, and I've always found it really difficult from the start. Some people say, "Oh, that's just the Reddit, the dorks or the Cheeto fingered guys online." No, it's the coaches too, man. There's a lot of
Yeah.
coaches with the same, like, this behavior comes from somewhere. It's not just the Redditors who don't train. There's coaches just like this too. They're not saying it quite the same way. They're saying it on a pedestal, but
Mm-hmm.
it's something that I've always had a hard time with, and sometimes feel like I'm out of place in this sport because I'm like, oh, I'm just not like that, right? Like I don't like you said, right? I do care about what happens in the fight, but like I care about effect, right?
Yeah.
Is that person effective? Are you effective? Um, Not to say that there may not be problems, like I think sometimes we mess up, we can confuse effect, performance and outcome, right? You can win a bunch of fights and still not necessarily perform well, or maybe there's some huge flaws in your
Mm-hmm.
approach. So we can still address these things, right, regardless of outcome. But I really care about what's effective, and I think that's why maybe coming across this ecological stuff and this more non-linear, non-traditional style of coaching really gels well with me. Um, because I was one, drilling sucks, right? This
Boring as
and I
fuck.
did it a lot, man. Like I did a lot of drilling when I came up, like because I believed in it. Like we had guys from out of town and like these high level competitors come in, do seminars or train with us sometimes. So we were lucky for that. We were exposed to like some high level guys, so you get to ask them questions or move around with them and be like, hey, like, you said you were at Henzo's. I used to be at a Henzo affiliate, and they brought in a guy. Well, he's at Marcelo's now, Gianni Grippo.
Oh yeah, I know
They
Gianni. I
brought
used to
him
travel.
in when he.
I was at Marcelo's for a while too. I know Gianni.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So he came in when he was a brown belt still at Henzo's. And he was like, yeah, so here's my training schedule. Because me and my friend Ben, we were like, tell us the secret, right? What's the perfect optimal training frequency? And this kid trained a lot at the time. He was like, yeah, so I go in the morning, I do my strength and conditioning for 3 hours or something. And then I do a private with John once or twice a week, or maybe it was every day. It was insane. But he was like, before my session, I'll drill for an hour to an hour and a half. And then after my session, I'll drill for another hour or something. And like the amount of drilling he was doing, he's like, this is what sets you apart. He said, this is what the Mendes brothers are doing. This is what the Meow brothers are doing. And the Lloyd Irvin guys, they're all doing this. So me and Ben were like, okay, yeah, we'll do it too. I just ended up getting a bunch of like overuse injuries. Like I was trying to drill these like long step passes in the gi. Um, for those who don't know, when you do a long step pass, you usually end up posting on your elbow
Mm-hmm.
to like throw your high leg over. Man, my elbow was so swollen and so like just full of fluid that I was drilling it still and just wearing an elbow pad so that I could keep drilling it.
Yeah.
And long story short, I didn't end up pulling off a long step pass until probably a year or two later. There was no transfer, and I knew it. I was like, "Yeah, this is not working." So I was a non-believer in drilling pretty quick, but I still believed in like the optimal movement solution, right? Like
Yeah.
what's I think that's another thing I hate about jujitsu. Actually, I think you see it in striking a bit, but in jujitsu, it's obvious, right? It's a technical arms race. Who's got the new secret move that's going to
Yeah.
crush everybody, right?
Yep.
And this is like we need to get away from this as soon as possible. Like this type of thinking, I think, holds the sport back more than anything.
Yeah. I think I was listening to when Noah Schaffner, I can't pronounce his last
Yeah,
name, was on Scott Seavright's podcast, and he had me cracking up. He was like, people collect techniques as if they're gonna like throw them at you like a deck of Pokemon cards.
it's true. Yeah,
And it's like, yeah, one thing that you forgot to mention is that like all those techniques and those hours and hours of drilling that you did were against a cooperative, unresisting opponent. You know what I mean? And so, like, the minute someone starts to kind of try to frustrate your plans, it's a whole different game. And so we should just probably just train like that from the jump.
yeah, and Noah's right. They actually are throwing them at each other like Pokemon cards or whatever. Not they're throwing at them at each other in their live training, so they're forced. But more importantly, the only place that they're having an effect is when they're sitting on the sidelines. That's when they really play jujitsu. It's like,
Mm.
well, I got this move from Gordon Ryan. It's like, yeah, well, I got this move from John Danaher. And then someone else is like,
Yeah.
Yahtzee motherfuckers, I just got this move from this new kid who just won this thing. And this is how we're doing it from now on.
Yeah.
And then somewhere else, like meanwhile, there's other guys training and they're kicking your ass, right? And this is not to knock on guys who like, it's okay. Like if you like jujitsu and you want to talk about what's going on in the sport or matches, great. Like if you're involved, you're involved. But I think ultimately in the end, we all just want to be good at what we're doing, right? Like if you're gonna commit even 2 hours a week, which is not a lot, but I mean if that's all you can put in because you got a job or you got kids or whatever, make those 2 hours count, man. Like, so that when you're at the office by the water cooler or whatever, hopefully you can take that guy down and hold him down, right? The guy in accounting that's pissing you off. Like if one day he decides to jump you, hopefully you're ready and you're not just throwing instructional DVDs at him.
Yeah, man. It's like and me being like a strength and conditioning guy, um the physical conditioning that you get from training live is just so much greater. It's just like you're like the same kind of time unit. You're just getting so much more quality work within that time. And like especially in jujitsu, like jujitsu is like a sport where you can just see some people that are pretty out of shape be competitive. And you don't really see a ton of that in like striking because like physical fitness is just baked into a lot of the striking. Like there's like
Yeah.
calisthenics and stuff that are kind of baked into a lot of classes. And I just think jujitsu people are in some ways really far ahead of striking, like in terms of just like philosophical type stuff. But from the physical kind of conditioning piece, I think we're actually really far behind because there's just that physicality is needed. Like I just like to poke people a lot of times, and I'll just post something like strength greater than technique just to
Yeah.
get people mad. You know what I mean? And I think that's really just to kind of get the conversation going, to kind of bring light to that. Because like physical, like the live training is just like I've seen such a big jump in my room since adopting a 100% live approach.
Oh yeah, for sure. There's a couple things going on there too with jujitsu, right? Like the sales and marketing of it all, like the smaller, weaker man can beat the bigger, stronger dude. And there might be some truth to that, right? Like if I'm trained and I'm 190 pounds and this guy's 300 pounds and untrained and not a physical dude at all, probably gonna whoop his ass, right? But I still wouldn't want to take that bet, man. Like even I've been doing this a long time, and if some guy who's 6'6", 300 pounds is at a bar and we're in a constrained space, like I'm not necessarily thinking I'm gonna have a great time and I'm gonna, But there's like nerds out there who are like, yeah, man, like I've been doing this fucking 18 months, 3 days a week, bro. I'm gonna triangle choke the shit out of this guy. It's like, no, you're gonna get thrown on your fucking head. That's what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
So there's a disconnect there because of the sales and marketing of it all and the culture. And there's just this. jujitsu guys get offended if you say, "Oh man, you're really strong." It's like I think it should be the opposite. It's like,
Yeah,
man,
dude.
if you're strong, you're probably technical too, man. Like it's a physical sport. It's the art of like holding a guy down right against his will,
Yeah,
and then taking his limbs away from him and stretching him, squeezing him, and like it's a physical thing, right? And like if you're getting good at this, you are getting stronger, right? You may not be getting necessarily stronger on your squat, right? You might even see that go down,
right.
but like you're getting stronger. Like one thing I've noticed too, just the guys I have here, and I'm still a new gym, but I think that they're tougher, they're stronger, they're more robust, and not just from a skills perspective, but from a like a physical perspective. Um, and that's something I would like to work on in the next year or so with the gym is when I started doing this using this approach and going down this rabbit hole, I kind of tossed a lot of my strength and conditioning stuff aside because that was actually my first, like I was saying, that was my first love, right? Was lifting and learning how to lift. And I worked as a personal trainer and helped a lot of guys with their strength and conditioning even while I was competing and fighting. It was kind of like my little side gig.
Hmm.
Um, Something I even considered doing full time for a bit. And that's kind of how I fell into this where I'm at now with not just coaching, but the ecological stuff. It all kind of happened around that time. It was kind of like a moment where I got to decide like which path am I going to go down. But yeah, all that to say is like I would like to kind of reintroduce some of the GPP into my room. I do have guys lift. I mean, I'm still trying to lift, but I'm just fucking dad bod, fat and out of shape right now. But I'm trying to get back into it, and I think I want to step that up as well with the guys and try to bridge the gap between strength and conditioning training and your skill development.
Yeah, I think you and I have talked offline about this a little bit. I'm a big fan like of using kind of unconventional methods. I mean, I guess that these days they are even the unconventional has become conventional, but like just using like what I refer to as like odd object training. So like your kettlebells, your maces, your Bulgarian bags, sandbags, stuff like that. I think there's just a huge utility there for combat athletes for a couple of
Yeah,
reasons. One, it's like you can never really, even if you wanted to, you can't really replicate the same reps twice, right? So right away we have something where it's different from your traditional barbell lifts where I talked to Rob Gray about this. Like when you have 90% on your back, you are already in a very constrained environment and you don't really want a ton of variability there. Like you kind of have to have that shit buttoned up real tight. But when you use something like a sandbag or a Bulgarian bag or a mace, no two reps are the same, and so you're getting kind of that like Bernstein's hammer effect with each and every rep,
yeah,
which I really like. And most of the odd object tools are going to be inherently sub maximal. So there's like two different types of fatigue. I was talking uh, about this with my guest yesterday. There's like volume fatigue and like neural fatigue. And
mm-hmm.
well, from training, like on the mats, we get a ton of volume fatigue just because like we're just hours and hours and hours. But there's also neural fatigue that you get from like super high
Yeah,
intensity like weight training, and that shit is like it's like somebody just unplugs you. You just feel like you're just dead, and so you don't get a lot of that neural fatigue from these sub max kind of variable tools. And I think that is probably a good approach for training the combat athletes for their S&C.
yeah. This is something I've been thinking about more recently, just because of what I just said just now. But it's even what you're doing is probably even more controversial than trying to be more live in an MMA context because the lifting world
Oh, forget it.
is so traditional, right? Like, and I'm guilty of it too. It's like, and I actually hurt my body a lot thinking that way. Like, I'll give you a quick example. Like, um, I found out very organically that it was not going to be possible to lift the way I was lifting prior to doing MMA. I used to lift 4 or 5 days a week, and I found out pretty quick. I was like, "There's no fucking way I'm going to be
Yep.
able to lift 4 or 5 days a week." I brought it down to three, brought it down to two, I brought it down to one, and I was like, "Yeah, anywhere between 1 to 3 sessions is probably plenty."
Yeah.
I could do more, but I'm probably going to suffer and pay the price, or it's gonna have a negative effect somewhere, even if it's just the training volume thing, right? Um, so I figured that out organically, and then I also kind of figured out I was like, I don't need. I was never someone who needed much volume. You know, I started training young, so I got a lot of stimulus out of like low volume training, and even gained some muscle not
Hmm.
doing a ton of volume. And then I found out really quick. I was like, I sure as hell don't need much of it now.
Yeah.
Um, but I still had that traditional thinking where I was like, well, I'm not doing a lot of volume. I'm not training. I don't have a high frequency. So I better make the most out of these sessions. And my idea of making the most out of it was like, what's the greatest stimulus I can get? Like, okay, if is it back squats? Cool. I can load the bar up as heavy as possible
Yeah.
and
Full
just get
nuclear.
oh yeah, just get my one set of 5 in. I would do dips, just 2, 3 sets of 5, like as heavy as possible. Ruin my elbows, ruin my hips, like
Hmm.
just because of movement optimization, right? I'm gonna take that pattern and I'm just gonna ride it till the wheels fall off. But in this context, because it's physical and not like the philosophical way of like I'm gonna ride it till the wheels fall off. You're gonna pay the price, right? And I think that's something that doesn't get talked about a ton in lifting. I know Franz Bosch talks about it a lot. It's like you never hear guys talk about we're gonna do this. Here are the pros, but also here are the cons.
Yeah.
In lifting, I feel like they're just trying to optimize everything, and they're like, yeah, so this is how you row. These are the pros, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's even harder to even like approach the conversation from like an ecological perspective as it relates to S&C because people are just so locked into and they're locked into shit that like research, their own research shows is probably not effective, but it's just so traditional and like people hate to deviate from that. And so I think that's an even longer
Oh yeah,
conversation that's going to be years. Joey, I know we both have a hard stops
yeah.
in a minute here, but I feel like we could have gone for another hour. So I definitely want to have you
Oh,
back
for
on at
sure.
some point.
Oh,
Um,
nice. Yeah, I'd love
yeah.
to.
Where can people go to learn more about you?
Yeah, they can go. I'm on social media. The gym handle is Click MMA, KLIQMMA. And for a direct line to me, my Instagram is less than Joe Mo. That's
Less than
probably the
Jomo.
easiest way to get me. But if that's too hard to find, just click MMA and I'll reply there.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'll put all the stuff in the show notes so people can access it easily. Joe, thanks so
Yes.
much, man. This is
Oh,
great.
thanks, man. And I'll just one thing I'll say real quick. If anyone is out there who's still trying to figure out this ecological stuff, and maybe a Greg or a Scott or some of these guys, they're already talking to a lot of people. If they want a lesser version of that, I'm their guy. So if they want an easier to reach guy who maybe might be a bit more patient or have a bit more time to chat, I'm happy to help people out. I'm trying to find more people who are into this, not just in my area because there's none, but just states, Canada, whatever. I really believe in this stuff, and I hope that more and more people pick this up. And if there's any way I can help, even though I'm not super far along, I've still done a bit. So yeah, I'd be happy to chat with anyone. So
Hell yeah. Awesome. Take them up on that, folks. Joe, thanks again, man. And let's talk again real soon.
awesome. Yeah, thanks a lot, man. Hope
All
to
right.
chat again soon.
Later, brother.
Yep.
All right. Thanks for listening to another episode. If you could like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube, I would very much appreciate it. Additionally, if you could leave a 5-star rating or perhaps leave a review, I'll be your best friend. And make sure to follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Graybeard Black Belt if you're not already. And yeah, I appreciate the support. So I always want to continue to build this community. So if you ever have any questions about anything that we discussed on this episode or anything that I post about, I'm happy to field any questions. So just make sure to DM me. I'm pretty responsive on there. And yeah, until next time.